In diplomacy, words are usually cheap: condemnations, warnings, red lines. We hear them every day. But there is one signal that is never cheap. There is one move that no government makes unless they are terrified of what comes next. That signal is the evacuation of the embassies. As we speak, today, January 15th, 2026, that signal is flashing red. Poland, Italy, the UK, one by one, Western nations are pulling their people out of Tehran. But the most chilling signal isn't coming from an embassy, it's coming from a military base. Reports confirm that the United States has begun a partial withdrawal of non-essential staff from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. This is not normal. You don't clear support staff from your biggest regional hub unless you are clearing the decks for a fight or preparing to catch incoming fire. Today, with the Iranian rial trading at 1.4 million to the dollar, with the Grand Bazaar on strike, and with the regime's security forces seemingly overwhelmed, the calculus has changed. Is the United States preparing to deliver the final push to a regime that is already falling off the cliff? Or are we looking at a different kind of war entirely? Let's look at the reality of 2026. To understand why American bombers might be warming up their engines, we first have to understand why the streets of Iran are burning. It didn't start with a political speech, it started with a price tag. In late December 2025, the Iranian rial didn't just slide, it died. We hit a psychological breaking point: 1.4 million rials to $1. Think about what that means. Imagine walking into a grocery store in the morning to buy milk, and by the time you leave work in the evening, your salary has lost 10% of its value. This isn't inflation. This is the vaporization of life savings. The most important image of this week isn't a burning police car, it's the closed shutters of the Tehran Grand Bazaar. Historically, the bazaar is the heart of Iran's economy. In 1979, when the Bazaris turned against the Shah fell. Now, in 2026, they have turned against the supreme leader. Why? Because commerce has become impossible. You cannot run a business when you don't know what money is worth. The regime tried to fix this the only way they know how: force. They arrested currency traders, they threatened shopkeepers, but you cannot arrest basic math. The collapse of the rial was the final breach of the social contract. It stripped the regime of its last defense: the ability to feed its own patronage network. The Revolutionary Guards, IRGC, need to be paid. The Basij need to be paid. When the money becomes worthless, loyalty becomes expensive, and this economic paralysis created the perfect vacuum for what happened next. We have seen protests in Iran before: 2009, 2019, the tragic 2022 uprising after Mahsa Amini's death. But if you listen closely to the audio coming out of Isfahan and Tabriz tonight, the sound is different. In 2022, the slogans were about dignity, about women, life, freedom. Today, the slogans are existential. They are chanting, "We don't want an Islamic republic. Long live the Shah." They are chanting against the concept of the Ayatollahs' rule. What makes this dangerous for the Ayatollahs is the demographic shift. This isn't just university students in North Tehran. This is the working class. When the poor join the intellectuals, revolutions happen. We are seeing reports of police stations being overrun, not by organized militias, but by angry mobs. We are seeing videos of Basij members hesitating to shoot. Why? Because they are hungry too. The fear wall has cracked. And this is where the United States enters the picture, because a regime that is terrified of its own people is a regime that is unpredictable. Tehran has always had one standard playbook when domestic pressure gets too high: create an external crisis. To distract from the hunger at home, they might lash out abroad. And that brings us to the Persian Gulf. Let's go back to that evacuation at Al Udeid Air Base. For those who don't follow military logistics, Al-Udeid in Qatar is the brain of US operations in the Middle East. It's the forward headquarters of CENTCOM. You do not partially evacuate it because of a protest in Tehran. You evacuate it because you have intelligence that missiles might be flying your way. There are two ways to interpret this withdrawal. Theory 1. The defensive crouch. US intelligence believes the desperate regime in Tehran is planning a strike on US assets, perhaps to drag America into a war that will rally the Iranian public around the flag. The US is moving non-combatants out of harm's way. Theory 2. Clearing the decks. This is the more aggressive interpretation. If the United States is planning a massive air campaign to target Iran's nuclear facilities or command centers, they know Iran will fire back at Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE. You move your soft targets out before you launch the first Tomahawk. Remember, the geopolitical landscape of 2026 is vastly different from 4 years ago. The Assad regime in Syria has already collapsed, 2024. Israel caused significant damage to Iranian infrastructure in mid-2025. The axis of resistance is broken. Iran is isolated. The US Navy has been repositioning assets. We aren't just seeing a carrier group. We are seeing the integration of cyber warfare capabilities and long-range bombers that don't need to be based in Qatar to strike. The Pentagon knows that the Ayatollahs are cornered, and a cornered animal is dangerous, but a cornered animal is also vulnerable. So, we return to the title of this video. Will the U.S. strike? To answer this, we have to look at the incentives in Washington. The argument for a strike. The regime is teetering. A precise, overwhelming air campaign targeting the IRGC command structure and the remaining nuclear sites could be the push that topples the whole rotten structure. It would be a chance to end a 47-year conflict without a ground invasion, simply by helping the Iranian people finish the job. If the US strikes the Basij headquarters, the protesters might take the buildings. The argument against a strike. Don't interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake. The regime is dying of natural causes, economic suicide. If the US strikes now, the Ayatollahs get a lifeline. They can scream, "Look, the great Satan is attacking us." They can brand every protester as an American agent. A US strike could ironically save the regime by giving them a patriotic war to fight. However, there is a third variable in this equation, one that keeps generals in the Pentagon awake at night. It is the variable that turns a regional crisis into a global catastrophe, the nuclear breakout. For the last 6 months, intelligence agencies have been warning that Tehran has been engaging in what is known as opaque enrichment. Since the inspectors were kicked out in late 2025, the IAEA has been flying blind, but satellite thermal imaging over the Natanz and Fordow facilities suggests that the centrifuges are spinning at maximum capacity. Here is the nightmare scenario driving the urgency at Al-Udeid. The regime knows it is collapsing economically. They know the streets are lost. They know their conventional deterrence is gone. In this chaotic endgame, the hardliners might calculate that their only insurance policy against a destiny like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein is the bomb. If US intelligence suggests that Iran is moving fissile material from enrichment sites to weaponization facilities, a process that takes days, not months, the argument against a strike evaporates instantly. The president cannot allow a regime in the midst of a violent, chaotic collapse to possess a functional nuclear warhead, the risk of loose nukes. Of a warhead vanishing during a civil war and ending up in the hands of a proxy group, is an existential threat to global security. This is why the withdrawal from Qatar is so telling. It suggests the US is clearing the battle space not just for a skirmish, but for a potential strike on deeply buried, hardened targets. Such a strike would require massive ordnance, likely the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, and the blast waves would be felt politically across the entire region. But while we watch the skies for American bombers, The real death blow to the regime might come from within the shadows of its own palace. We need to talk about the fracture inside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. For decades, we viewed the IRGC as a monolithic ideological army. That was a mistake. In 2026, the IRGC is a business conglomerate first and a militia second. They control construction, telecommunications, and oil smuggling. With the rial at 1.4 million and the economy paralyzed, the IRGC's vast business empire is hemorrhaging cash. The generals are not just losing power, they are losing their personal fortunes. Human intelligence, HUMINT, reports leaking from Tehran suggest a split between the ideological old guard, those loyal to the absolute clerical rule, and the technocratic generals, who care more about survival and wealth than theology. These technocratic generals are watching the same protests we are. They see the writing on the wall. They know that if the ship sinks, they go down with the mullahs, unless they throw the mullahs overboard first. This creates a dangerous paradox. A weakened, fracturing regime is more prone to miscalculation. One faction might launch a missile at a US vessel to provoke a war that forces unity. Another faction might try to open a back channel to Washington, offering up the nuclear program in exchange for immunity and a role in the post-Ayatollah government. The US State Department is likely receiving contradictory signals right now, threats of war from the podiums in Tehran, and desperate whispers for a deal from encrypted channels. This confusion increases the risk of accidental escalation. If a rogue IRGC commander, acting without orders from the top, fires on a US destroyer in the Persian Gulf to prove his loyalty or ignite chaos, the US rules of engagement, ROE, will dictate an immediate, massive response. This is the fog of war before the first shot is even fired. The evacuation of the embassies tells us that Western governments no longer believe there is a coherent phone number to call in Tehran to de-escalate. When diplomacy goes silent, military logistics speak volumes, and right now, the logistics are screaming. The most likely scenario isn't a full-scale invasion, and it isn't total silence. It is what military analysts call kinetic support. This means cyber attacks to disable the regime's communication tools, making it harder for them to coordinate crackdowns. It means jamming their radar. And, if the regime starts massacring civilians on a large scale, it could mean limited strikes on the specific units committing the slaughter. The evacuation of the embassies suggests the West is preparing for the worst-case scenario, that the regime, facing collapse, decides to launch its ballistic missile arsenal at Israel or Saudi Arabia as a final act of spite. If that happens, the US strike won't be a question of if, but how hard. The collapse of the rial was the spark. The evacuation of the embassies is the warning siren. However, the US is positioning its forces around Iran. They are betting that the regime, in its death throes, will lash out, and when they do, the response will be overwhelming. The era of the Ayatollahs began with a revolution. It appears it is ending with one. The only question left is how much rubble will be left when the dust settles. In the end, I want you to listen the new Shah's address. See you tomorrow.
To all of our friends around the world, under the yoke of the Islamic Republic, Iran is identified in your minds with terrorism, extremism, and poverty. The real Iran is a different Iran, a beautiful, peace-loving, and flourishing Iran. It is the Iran that existed before the Islamic Republic, and it is the Iran that will rise again from its ashes the day the Islamic Republic falls. So let me be clear about how a free Iran will act towards its neighbors and the world after the fall of this regime. In security and foreign policy, Iran's nuclear military program will end. Support for terrorist groups will cease immediately. A free Iran will work with regional and global partners to confront terrorism, organized crime, drug trafficking, and extremist Islamism. Iran will act as a friend and a stabilizing force in the region, and it will be a responsible partner in global security. In diplomacy, relations with the United States will be normalized, and our friendship with America and her people will be restored. The State of Israel will be recognized immediately. We will pursue the expansion of the Abraham Accords into the Cyrus Accords, bringing together a free Iran, Israel, and the Arab world. A new chapter will begin, grounded in mutual recognition, sovereignty, and national interest. In energy, Iran holds some of the largest oil and gas reserves in the world. A free Iran will become a reliable energy supplier to the free world. Policymaking will be transparent. Iran's actions will be responsible. Prices will be predictable. In transparency and governance, Iran will adopt and enforce international standards. Money laundering will be confronted. Organized corruption will be dismantled. Public institutions will answer to the people. In the economy, Iran is one of the world's last great untapped markets. Our population is educated, modern, with a diaspora that connects it to the four corners of the world. A democratic Iran will open its economy to trade, investment, and innovation, and Iran will seek to invest in the world. Opportunity will replace isolation. This is not an abstract vision. It is a practical one, grounded in national interest, stability, and cooperation. To achieve this, now is the time to stand with the Iranian people. The fall of the Islamic Republic and the establishment of a secular, democratic government in Iran will not only restore dignity to my people, it will benefit the region and the world. A free Iran will be a force for peace, for prosperity, and for partnership.